Surviving Tomorrow, written and performed by WotFanar. The Prologue. 5. Grant was doing his best to look relaxed as he sat in the back of a rocket that was about to take him to space. 4. The teenager had never been to space before, but he'd played VR games where he got to go into space, and he's sure that this would be roughly the same experience. 3. His mind wandered back to fond old days of playing Captain Shatner as he got to go through and punch aliens and sleep with their girlfriends. 2. And then there was that wonderful mod where you got to go to the planet with all of the wonderful hermaphrodite people. 1. Oh, and then there was that one he really liked, the one with the 6 boobs and the 2 giant penises. Oh, what was their name? Oh, that's right, it was Blast Off. The engines let out a deafening roar, which by comparison would have made a stadium full of Vanessa Vasquez fans seem disinterested. Grant's cool nonchalance evaporates as the rocket shakes him and his brain turns to mush. It turns out that the developers of Captain Shatner had never actually been to space, because that would be a very expensive thing to do for something that wasn't a core aspect of their game. Punching aliens and sleeping with their girlfriends or boyfriends, or in fact anything that had a pulse, was much more the focus of that game, and as such Grant seemed rather unprepared for what was about to happen. As Earth tries to keep us all grounded, the rocket gives its all as it continues to ascend towards the atmosphere. The front of the ship separates as it exits the atmosphere, and Grant is finally given the chance to catch his breath and say, "Holy shit." As Grant looked out his window, he could see before him the great expanse of space. This, however, was something he had been prepared for. The creators of his virtual reality games could easily afford to look at pictures of space, and in fact had gone to great efforts to make space look better than it actually does, putting in nebulas and things that were nowhere near the Earth at the time of this launch. Overall, this was a giant improvement, and so actual space was really kind of underwhelming to Grant, and he managed to regain his, "Oh, I've seen everything, I'm pretty cool," even though he had almost shit his pants just mere minutes ago. As things started to calm down, the monitor in front of Grant came to life. It was time for the in-flight entertainment. Well, that's what someone who was sucking up to their boss had called it. What actually came onto the monitor was that grainy 4K footage of the American president as he had launched the starship Nova Phoenix. Grant let out a groan as he realised he was going to be subjected to yet more torture, and he looked out the window and tried to see one of the 4 space stations that orbited the Earth. He thought he could make one out, but wasn't sure which one it was. Was it that space cruise station that all the holiday goers would go to? Was it the Cerberus, the prison we kept all those people who were a bit too dangerous to keep on Earth? Or perhaps it was the International Space Station, the oldest of all of the space stations, though whether or not it's still the original space station is very much debatable. It's a modular system, and as all of the original pieces are no longer part of what the current International Space Station is, it could possibly be the newest of the space stations and the oldest, but these were things for philosophers to worry about, not teenage boys who were being shipped off to a rehabilitation centre. You know, next time I decide to do this, I should really remember to bring some music, Grant thought to himself, before the gravity of his situation really settled in, which was ironic because this was the first time in his life that he was indeed weightless. There wasn't going to be a next time. His days of time travelling were over. That's what the whole point of him being sent out here was. And though he had racked his brain, there was no way he could see of acquiring time travelling pills while on the station. And even if he could get pills, it's not like he'd go and get himself caught by his parents again. No, this was a one-way trip. There was no next time. He would have kicked himself, except for the fact that he was in a giant clunky spacesuit. And so there was no music. just a presidential speech in the background. Many civilizations had their own metaphors for rebirth, whether it's the phoenix or the forest fire. The idea of destruction and renewal is something that is prevalent in all cultures, but none of them are quite as romantic as the physicists. You see, in science, there's a thing called a supernova. It is the second most destructive thing in the universe. The only thing that's more destructive than a supernova is a black hole, which is indeed created by a supernova. But supernovas are so awe-inspiring. Not only are they beautiful to look at, but as they explode, they eject all of the matter created in stars into the universe, so that we can have those elements that would not exist without the supernova. This planet could not exist without it, because we are all made of stardust. And it is in that effort of renewal that I commissioned this starship. The camera then cuts to a bottle of champagne smashing against the side of a station. Perhaps using alcohol to launch a rehab centre was ill-advised, but it was traditional, and so it is what happened. The shuttle was nearing the end of its journey, and out of the window Grant could now see his new home, the space station Nova Phoenix. Like its name, it looked like a bird with a long thick body and 2 long wings outstretched. Each of these wings had 6 smaller nacelles, which looked like little feathers on the beast. The Phoenix soared in a heliaxial orbit around the Earth. The spin of the station gave it a centripetal force similar to that of gravity, in a way that fascinates science fiction writers and in no way interested Grant. As the station neared, he could see inside some of the glass nacelles, inside of which some inhabitants were doing some mundane tasks, and in one of which was a rather tubby lad, waving with all of his might. He was probably screaming, but in space, sound doesn't travel. This larger figure then ran. Presumably he was going to the head of the ship, where the eyes of the Phoenix became the docking airlocks. As the ship matched the station's spin, gravity returned to the cabin, and then with a jolt, Grant knew that they had reached their destination. The pilot opened the door to Grant's compartment so that he could now make his way towards the airlock. He got hold of his luggage and made his way to the hissing door as it started to pressurise. Then, just before the door opened, the tannoid rang out with the voice of that same president. It only takes a fool to run into fire, but only a hero comes out the other side the stronger for it. And with that, the doors open to Grant's new home.